Hello, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. It is Monday, May 13th, and I am ready for some wonderful mine later on in the afternoon. We'll have a pre-pub, Presence of the Bookworm, and then Tuesday we'll have our discussion as always. But today, early in the morning, we're going to have some Jane Eyre. We continue our read-along of this very interesting book. It's a classic. And, I hope that you all had a wonderful weekend and a good Mother's Day as well. If you're a mom or if you were a kid, that you did all kinds of fun things for your mom. And so, today we begin this new phase in Jane's life. So this is what you would call the third phase of her life, because the first one, let's say, was with her Aunt Reed, where she was being neglected, and she had like a house and all the things, but she was not really loved. It was a very cold place. So the second phase of her life was her time at Lowood. In the last read along, we put a close on it. Basically, we finished her childhood. As you all know, Lowood School was basically a charitable institution. The food was not good, the clothing were not good, the children went hungry sometimes and cold, especially in the winter. And then there was an epidemic of typhus, which, did away with a lot of kids. Many little girls died, including Helen, who was Jane Eyre's bestie. But Helen did not die of typhus. She died of consumption, of tuberculosis. So this marked a shift in Jane's life. And little by little, we get her to develop, emotionally, and she's growing up. So, after in the last read along, we basically just a little update on her life. So after the epidemic, things started actually improving at Lowood because it drew so much attention and public outrage. Just the treatment of the little girls and how they were like having a really difficult time, that they decided to remove Mr. Brocklehurst from being the only overseer and the only manager, and they set up a committee of people who were able to give a more balanced environment for their little girls. So there was economy, but not without sacrificing the girls' comfort, health, and well-being. So that happened, and during that time, Jane Eyre she just really, really worked hard. She, under the tutelage and just the influence of Miss Temple, who was like somebody she really looks up to, she was able to rise up from being a student. After 6 years, she became a teacher herself. So she started teaching at Lowood for 2 years. And she was happy and content there because she had a friend in Miss Temple. But then Miss Temple had to go because, oh no, she got married. Oh no, how dare she get married? But you guys know that during this era, it was important for women to get married. It was just, society expects it, and it was a rough and tumble world, and you didn't want to be a single woman without protection if you did not have like a fortune to back you up. So Miss Temple got married, and Jane Eyre is like, yo, what do I do now? She was feeling like adrift, so she decided after some contemplation to, head out into the world. She always wanted to explore the world, so she's gonna go and, try her luck out there. She advertises in a local newspaper that she is looking for a position to teach. She has experience to teach. So after a while, she gets a letter offering her a job at a place called Thornfield Hall for a little girl. And so after about a month of like sending her references and trying to get everything sorted out, Jane is finally able to strike out on her own and she is on her way now to Thornfield. This is basically catching you up. So, Red Tempest, if you're there, if you're here, hello. Yes, yes, Red Tempest. Uh, I hope that that was enough to catch you up. She became Mary Poppins, I suppose. But she doesn't have the magic nanny bag, unfortunately. And the cool little umbrella thing that makes her travel and fly all over the place. Unfortunately, no, she had to take a carriage. And but yeah, she's going to be a nanny. She's going to be a positive influence in somebody's life, hopefully. All right, so that's catching you up. But before I continue to read, I just want to say hello to everybody on the chat. Early gang, where you at? Okay, Red Tempest was actually the first. Welcome, welcome. I'm glad that you're here, even though you said you're a little bit behind. I hope that I caught you up. If you have any questions, feel free to type them out there. We'll do our best, or the chat will do their best to fill you in. But yeah. So happy to have you. Also, Kihana says, woohoo, new session. Almost back to back with pre-pop. I know. So probably, I don't know if you will be here. I don't know if the time works for you, but I hope that you enjoy the replay. I always look forward to reading your comments. Thank you so much for leaving your thoughts. And yeah, I hope you have sweet dreams. Right now you're sleeping. Hey Liz, how are you? Happy to see you. And Drew Production says, I might actually be able to watch this one live. Yay! I'm glad that you will. Hope that you enjoy this one. We are starting off this part in Jane Eyre's life. I think this is like the chapter where things finally start moving, you know. So, I mean, her childhood was kind of actually pretty interesting, like to tell us about the world where she lived in and you know her character. So we have an idea of where she comes from, like at the end when we look back and see how she's changed. It's always good to have that. And okay, so let's see who else is on the chat. Oh, Noodles Dumplings Kimchi. Hello, hello. Yes, perfect for your treadmill. And you know, I'm glad that you have something nice to listen to. Today I got up and took my protein drink, went out. I didn't go to the gym because I actually canceled my gym account. So I'm just going round and round the park close to my house. So just going around full circles. So I did that. So I had my walk. I didn't get to listen to my favorite audiobook or podcast or whatnot because I went with my mom. And you know, my mom likes to talk. And so I actually enjoyed that time with my mom. So I didn't get to run or jog because of course I'm with my mom, so we have different paces. But other than that, I enjoyed my walk. So I hope you enjoy your walk. All right, Little Butterfly says, I will be listening later. Okay, Little Butterfly. And by the way, thank you for the memes you shared on the Discord. I will be sharing them further later on into the stream. So thank you. You totally nailed them. All right, so yes, parks are always nice places to walk, especially right now. It's kind of like overcast here in SoCal, so not a lot of sun. It's perfect because me and the sun, we don't get along very well. Like I get headaches if I get overheated or whatnot. I'm just a very delicate flower, so like overcast days are perfect for walks. All right, everybody, so you know who else likes to take walks? Jane. Jane likes to take walks. In fact, this book started with there will be no walk today. Well, it was raining for her. And now she is on her way. She's not walking to her new job. She is taking the carriage. So she's going to go and do the places, meet her new folks, meet the new people she's going to be living with. And so, yeah, let's do this, everybody. Let's read some more of Jane Eyre. All right. Jane Eyre. Chapter 11. A new chapter in a novel is something like a new scene in a play. And when I draw up the curtain this time, reader, you must fancy you see a room in the George Inn at Millcote, with such a large figured papering on the walls as inn rooms have. Such a carpet, such furniture, such ornaments on the mantelpiece, such prints, including a portrait of George III and another of the Prince of Wales, and a representation of the death of Wolfe. All this visible to you by the light of an oil lamp hanging from the ceiling, and by that of an excellent fire, near which I sit in my cloak and bonnet. My muff and umbrella lie on the table, and I am warming away the numbness and chill contracted by 16 hours' exposure to the rawness of an October day. I left Lowtown at 4 o'clock a.m., and the Millcote town clock is now just striking 8. Reader, though I look comfortably accommodated, I am not very tranquil in my mind. I thought when the coach stopped here there would be someone to meet me. I looked anxiously round as I descended the wooden steps, the boots placed for my convenience, expecting to hear my name pronounced, and to see some description of carriage waiting to convey me to Thornfield. Nothing of the sort was visible, and when I asked the waiter if anyone had been to inquire after a Miss Eyre, I was answered in the negative. So I had no resource but to request to be shown into a private room. And here I am waiting, while all sorts of doubts and fears are troubling my thoughts. It is a very strange sensation to inexperienced youth to feel itself quite alone in the world, cut adrift from every connection, uncertain whether the port to which it is bound can be reached, and prevented by many impediments from returning to that it has quitted. The charm of adventure sweetens that sensation. The glow of pride warms it. But then the throb of fear disturbs it, and fear with me became predominant when half an hour elapsed and I was still alone. I bethought myself to ring the bell. "Is there a place in this neighborhood called Thornfield?" I asked of the waiter who answered the summons. "Thornfield? I don't know, ma'am. I'll inquire at the bar." He vanished, but reappeared instantly. "Is your name Eyre, miss?" "Yes." "Person here waiting for you." I jumped up, took my muff and umbrella, and hastened into the inn passage. A man was standing by the open door, and in the lamp-lit street I dimly saw a one-horse conveyance. "Will this be your luggage, I suppose?" said the man rather abruptly when he saw me, pointing to my trunk in the passage. "Yes." He hoisted it onto the vehicle, which was a sort of car, and then I got in, before he shut me up. I asked him how far it was to Thornfield. "A matter of 6 miles." How long shall we be before we get there?" "Happen an hour and a half." An hour and a half, dang. All right. He fastened the car door, climbed to his own seat outside, and we set off. Our progress was leisurely, and gave me ample time to reflect. I was content to be at length so near the end of my journey, and as I leaned back in the comfortable though not elegant conveyance, I meditated much at my ease. I suppose, thought I, judging from the plainness of the servant and carriage, Mrs. Fairfax is not a very dashing person. So much the better. I never lived amongst fine people but once, and I was very miserable with them. I wonder if she lives alone except this little girl. If so, and if she is any degree amiable, I shall surely be able to get on with her. I will do my best. It is a pity that doing one's best does not always answer. At Lowood, indeed, I took that resolution, kept it, and succeeded in pleasing. But with Mrs. Reed, I remember my best was always spurned with scorn. Oh, I pray God Mrs. Fairfax may not turn out a second Mrs. Reed. But if she does, I am not bound to stay with her. Let the worst come to the worst. I can advertise again. How far are we on our road now, I wonder? I let down the window and looked out. Millcote was behind us. Judging by the number of its lights, it seemed a place of considerable magnitude, much larger than Lowtown. We were now, as far as I could see, on a sort of common, but there were houses scattered all over the district. I felt we were in a different region to Lowood, more populous, less picturesque, more stirring, less romantic. The roads were heavy, the night misty. My conductor let his horse walk all the way, and the hour and a half exceeded, I verily believe, to 2 hours. At last he turned in his seat and said, "You're none so far for Thornfield now." Again I looked out. We were passing a church. I saw its low, broad tower against the sky, and its bell was tolling a quarter. I saw a narrow galaxy of lights, too, on a hillside, marking a village or hamlet. About 10 minutes after, the driver got down and opened a pair of gates. We passed through, and they clashed to behind us. We now slowly ascended a drive and came upon the long front of a house. Candlelight gleamed from one curtained bow window, as all the rest were dark. The car stopped at the front door. It was opened by a maidservant. I alighted and went in. "Will you walk this way, ma'am?" said the girl, and I followed her across a square hall with high doors all around. She ushered me into a room whose double illumination of fire and candle at first dazzled me, contrasting as it did with the darkness to which my eyes had been for 2 hours inured. When I could see, however, a cozy and agreeable picture presented itself to my view. A snug, small room, a round table by a cheerful fire, an armchair high-backed and old-fashioned, wherein sat the neatest imaginable little elderly lady, in widow's cap, black silk gown, and snowy muslin apron, exactly like what I had fancied Mrs. Fairfax, only less stately and milder looking. She was occupied in knitting. A large cat sat demurely at her feet. Nothing, in short, was wanting to complete the beau ideal of domestic comfort. A more reassuring introduction for a new governess could scarcely be conceived. There was no grandeur to overwhelm, no stateliness to embarrass. And then, as I entered, the old lady got up and promptly and kindly came forward to meet me. "How do you do, my dear? I am afraid you have had a tedious ride. John drives so slowly. You must be cold. Come to the fire." "Mrs. Fairfax, I suppose," said I. "Yes, you are right. Do sit down." She conducted me to her own chair, and then began to remove my shawl and untie my bonnet strings. I begged she would not give herself so much trouble. "Oh, it is no trouble. I dare say your own hands are almost numbed with cold. Leah, make a little hot negus and cut a sandwich or two. Here are the keys of the storeroom." And she produced from her pocket a most housewifely bunch of keys and delivered them to the servant. "Now then, draw nearer to the fire," she continued. "You've brought your luggage with you, haven't you, my dear?" "Yes, ma'am." "I'll see it carried to your room," she said, and bustled out. She treats me like a visitor, thought I. I little expected such a reception. I anticipated only coldness and stiffness. This is not like what I have heard of the treatment of governesses, but I must not exult too soon. She returned. With her own hands she cleared her knitting apparatus and a book or two from the table, to make room for the tray which Leah now brought, and then herself handed me the refreshments. I felt rather confused at being the object of more attention than I had ever that I have ever before received, and that, too, shown by my employer and superior. But as she did not herself seem to consider she was doing anything out of place, I thought it better to take her civilities quietly. "Shall I have the pleasure of seeing Miss Fairfax tonight?" I asked, when I had partaken of what she had offered me. "What did you say, my dear? I'm a little deaf," returned the good lady, approaching her ear to my mouth. I repeated the question more distinctly. "Miss Fairfax! Oh, you mean Miss Verhans! Verhans is the name of your future pupil." "Indeed? Then she is not your daughter?" "No, I have no family." I should have followed up my first inquiry by asking in what way Miss Verhans was connected with her, but I recollected it was not polite to ask too many questions. Besides, I was sure to hear in time. "I am so glad," she continued as she sat down opposite to me, and took the cat on her knee. "I am so glad you are come. It will be quite pleasant living here now with a companion. To be sure, it is pleasant at any time, for Thornfield is a fine old hall, rather neglected of late years, perhaps, but it is still a respectable place. Yet, you know, in winter time one feels dreary, quite alone in the best quarters. I say alone. Leah is a nice girl, to be sure, and John and his wife are very decent people, but then you see they are only servants, and one can't converse with them on terms of equality. One must keep them at a due distance for fear of losing one's authority. I'm sure last winter it was a very severe one, if you recollect, and when it did snow, it rained and when it did not snow, it rained and blew. Last winter, not a creature but the butcher and postman came to the house from November till February, and I really got quite melancholy with sitting night after night alone. I had Leah in to read to me sometimes, but I don't think the poor girl liked the task much. She felt it confining. In spring and summer one got on better. Sunshine and long days make such a difference. And then, just at the commencement of this autumn, little Adela Varens came and her nurse. A child makes a house alive all at once. And now you're here, I shall be quite gay." My heart really warmed to the worthy lady as I heard her, and I drew my chair a little nearer to her, and expressed my sincere wish that she might find my company as agreeable as she anticipated. "But I'll not keep you sitting up late tonight," said she. "It is on the stroke of 12 now, and you have been travelling all day. You must feel tired. If you have got your feet well warmed, I'll show you to your bedroom. I've had the room next to mine prepared for you. It is only a small apartment, but I thought you would like it better than one of the large front chambers. To be sure, they have finer furniture, but they're so dreary and solitary. I never sleep in them myself." I thanked her for her considerate choice, and as I really felt fatigued with my long journey, expressed my readiness to retire. She took her candle, and I followed her from the room. First she went to see if the hall door was fastened. Having taken the key from the lock, she led the way upstairs. The steps and banisters were of oak. The staircase window was high and latticed. Both it and the long gallery into which the bedroom doors opened looked as if they belonged to a church rather than a house. A very chill and vault-like air pervaded the stairs and gallery, suggesting cheerless ideas of space and solitude, and I was glad, when finally ushered into my chamber, to find it of small dimensions and furnished in ordinary modern style. When Mrs. Fairfax had bidden me a good night, and I had fastened my door, gazed leisurely around, and in some measure effaced the eerie impressions made by that wide hall, that dark and spacious staircase, and that long, cold gallery, by the livelier aspect of my little room, I remembered that, after a day of bodily fatigue and mental anxiety, I was now, at last, in safe haven. The impulse of gratitude swelled my heart, and I knelt down at the bedside and offered up thanks where thanks were due, not forgetting, ere I rose, to implore aid on my further path and the power of meriting the kindness which seemed so frankly offered me before it was earned. My couch had no thorns in it that night, my solitary room no fears. At once weary and content, I slept soon, and soundly when I awoke. It was broad day. The chamber looked such a bright little place to me as the sun shone in between the gay blue chintz window curtains, showing papered walls and a carpeted floor, so unlike the bare planks and stained plaster of Lowood that my spirits rose at the view. Externals have a great effect on the young. I thought that a fair era of life was beginning for me, one that was to have its flowers and pleasures as well as its thorns and toils. My faculties, roused by the change of scene, the new field offered to hope, seemed all astir. I cannot precisely define what they expected, but it was something pleasant, not perhaps that day or that month, but at an indefinite future period. I rose, dressed myself with care, obliged to be plain, for I had no article of attire that was not made with that was not made with extreme simplicity. I was still by nature solicitous to be neat. It was not my habit to be disregardful of appearance or careless of the impression I made. On the contrary, I ever wished to look as well as I could, and to please as much as my want of beauty could permit. I sometimes regretted, I sometimes regretted that I was not handsomer. I sometimes wished to have rosy cheeks, a straight nose, and a small cherry mouth. I desired to be tall, stately, and finely developed in figure. I felt it a misfortune that I was so little, so pale, I had features so irregular and so marked. And why had I these aspirations and these regrets? It would be difficult to say. I could not then distinctly say it to myself, yet I had a reason, and a logical, natural reason too. However, when I had brushed my hair very smooth and put on my black frock, which Quaker-like as it quite, which Quaker-like as it was, at least had the merit of fitting to a nicety, and adjusted my clean white tucker, I thought I should do respectably enough to appear before Mrs. Fairfax, and that my new pupil would not at least recoil from me with antipathy. Having opened my chamber window, and seen that I left all things straight and neat on the toilet table, I ventured forth. Traversing the long and matted gallery, I descended the slippery steps of oak. Then I gained the hall. I halted there a minute. I looked at some pictures on the walls. One, I remembered, represented a grim man in a cuirass. In a cuirass? Cuirass. What is that? Let us look it up. Define. A piece of armor consisting of breastplate and backplate fastened together. Okay. A man wearing one of those. And one a lady with powdered hair and a pearl necklace. At a bronze lamp pendant from the ceiling, and a great clock whose case was of oak curiously carved, and an ebon black with time and rubbing. Everything appeared very stately and imposing to me, but then I was so little accustomed to grandeur. The hall door, which was half of glass, stood open. I stepped over the threshold. It was a fine autumn morning. Early sun shone serenely on embrowned groves and still green fields. Advancing onto the lawn, I looked up and surveyed the front of the mansion. It was 3 stories high, of proportions not vast, though considerable. A gentleman's manor house, not a nobleman's seat. Battlements round the top gave it a picturesque look. Its grey front stood out well from the background of a rookery, whose cawing tenants were now on the wing. They flew over the lawn and grounds to alight in a great meadow, from which these were separated by a sunk fence, and where an array of mighty old thorn trees, strong, knotty, and broad as oaks, at once explained the etymology of the mansion's designation. Further off were hills, not so lofty as those round Lowood, nor so craggy, nor so like barriers of separation from the living world, but yet quiet and lonely hills enough, and seeming to embrace Thornfield with a seclusion I had not expected to find existent so near the stirring locality of Millcote. A little hamlet, whose roofs were blent with trees, straggled up the side of one of these hills. The church of the district stood nearer Thornfield. Its old tower top looked over a knoll between the house and the gates. I was yet enjoying the calm prospect and pleasant fresh air, yet listening with delight to the cawing of the rooks, yet surveying the wide hoary front of the hall, and thinking what a great place it was for one lonely little dame like Mrs. Fairfax to inhabit, when that lady appeared at the door. "What, out already?" said she. "I see you are an early riser." I went up to her, and was received with an affable kiss and a shake of the hand. "How do you like Thornfield?" she asked. I told her I liked it very much. "Yes," she said, "it is a pretty place, but I fear it will be getting out of order unless Mr. Rochester should take it into his head to come and reside here permanently, or at least visit it rather oftener. Great houses and fine grounds require the presence of the proprietor." "Mr. Rochester?" I exclaimed. "Who is he?" "The owner of Thornfield," she responded quietly. "Did you not know he was called Rochester?" Of course I did not. I had never heard of him before, but the old lady seemed to regard his existence as a universally understood fact with which everybody must be acquainted by instinct. "I thought," I continued, "Thornfield belonged to you." "To me? Bless you, child, what an idea! To me! I am only the housekeeper, the manager. To be sure, I am distantly related to the Rochesters by the mother's side, or at least my husband was. He was a clergyman, incumbent of Hay, and that little village yonder on the hill, and that church near the gates, was his. The present Mr. Rochester's mother was a Fairfax, and a second cousin to my husband. But I never presume on the connection. In fact, it is nothing to me. I consider myself quite in the light of an ordinary housekeeper. My employer is always civil, and I expect nothing more." "And the little girl, my pupil?" "She is Mr. Rochester's ward. He commissioned me to find a governess for her. He intended to have her brought up in Lancashire, I believe. Here she comes, with her bonnet, as she calls her nurse." The enigma then was explained. This affable and kind little widow was no great dame, but a dependent like myself. I did not like her the worse for that. On the contrary, I felt better pleased than ever. The equality between her and me was real, not the mere result of condescension on her part. So much the better. My position was all the freer. As I was meditating on this discovery, a little girl, followed by her attendant, came running up the lawn. I looked at my pupil, who did not at first appear to notice me. She was quite a child, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, slightly built, with a pale, small-featured face, and a redundancy of hair falling in curls to her waist. "Good morning, Miss Adela," said Mrs. Fairfax. "Come and speak to the lady who is to teach you, and to make you a clever woman some day." She approached. Oh man, here goes my French, you guys. Oh boy. C'est la ma gouvernante, said she, pointing to me, and addressing her nurse, who answered, "Mais oui, certainement." "Are they foreigners?" I inquired, amazed at hearing the French language. "The nurse is a foreigner, and Adela was born on the continent, and I believe never left it till 6 months ago. When she first came here, she could speak no English. Now she can make shift to talk it a little. I don't understand her. She mixes it so with French, but you will make out her meaning very well, I dare say." Fortunately, I had the advantage of being taught French by a French lady, and as I was always made a point of conversing with Madame Pierrot as often as I could, and had besides, during the last 7 years, learnt a portion of French by heart daily, applying myself to take pains with my accent, and imitating as closely as possible the pronunciation of my teacher, I had acquired a certain degree of readiness and correctness in the language, and was not likely to be much at a loss with Mademoiselle Adela. She came and shook hands with me when she heard that I was her governess, and, as I led her into breakfast, I addressed some phrases to her in her own tongue. She replied briefly at first, but after we were seated at the table, and she examined me some 10 minutes with her large hazel eyes, she suddenly commenced chattering fluently. "Ah!" cried she in French, "you speak my language as well as Mr. Rochester does. I can talk to you as I can to him, and so can Sophie. She will be glad. Nobody here understands her. Madame Fairfax is all English. Sophie is my nurse. She came with me over the sea in a great ship, with a chimney that smoked. How it did smoke! And I was sick, and so was Sophie, and so was Mr. Rochester. Mr. Rochester lay down on a sofa in a pretty room called the salon, and Sophie and I had a little beds in another place. I nearly fell out of mine. It was like a shelf. And Mademoiselle, what's your name?" "Eyre, Jane Eyre." "Eyre? Bah, I cannot say it. Well, our ship stopped in the morning before it was quite daylight at a great city, a huge city, with very dark houses and all smoky. Not at all like the pretty clean town I came from. Mr. Rochester carried me in his arms over a plank to the land, and Sophie came after, and we all got into a coach, which took us to a beautiful large house, larger and finer, called a hotel. We stayed there nearly a week. I and Sophie used to walk every day in a great green place full of trees called the park, and there were many children there besides me, and a pond with beautiful birds in it that I fed with crumbs. Can you understand her when she runs on so fast? Asked Mrs. Fairfax. I understood her very well, for I had been accustomed to the fluent tongue of Madame Pierrot. I wish, continued the good lady, you would ask her a question or two about her parents. I wonder if she remembers them. Adele, I inquired, with whom did you live when you were in that pretty clean town you spoke of? I lived long ago with Mamma, but she's gone to the Holy Virgin. Mamma used to teach me to dance and sing and to say verses. A great many gentlemen and ladies came to see Mamma, and I used to dance before them, or to sit on their knees and sing to them. I liked it. Shall I let you hear me sing now? She had finished her breakfast, so I permitted her to give a specimen of her accomplishments. Descending from her chair, she came and placed herself on my knee. Then, folding her little hands demurely before her, shaking back her curls, and lifting her eyes to the ceiling, she commenced singing a song from some opera. It was the strain of a forsaken lady who, after bewailing the perfidy of her lover, calls pride to her aid, desires her attendant to deck her in her brightest jewels and richest robes, and resolves to meet the false one that night at a ball, and prove to him, by the gaiety of her demeanor, how little his desertion has affected her. The subject seemed strangely chosen for an infant singer, but I suppose the point of the exhibition lay in hearing the notes of love and jealousy warbled in the lisp of childhood, and in very bad taste that point was. At least I thought so. Adele sang the canzone tunefully enough, and with the naivete of her age. This achieved, she jumped from my knee and said, "Now, mademoiselle, I will repeat you some poetry." Assuming an attitude, she began, "La Rique des Rats, Fable de La Fontaine." All right, this is 3. It says, The League of Rats, Fable by La Fontaine. Hurrah for ebooks. Yes, it has translation. Nice. She then declaimed the little piece with an attention to punctuation and emphasis, a flexibility of voice, and an appropriateness of gesture, very unusual indeed at her age, and which proved she had been very carefully trained. "Was your mamma who taught you that piece?" I asked. "Yes, and she used to say it, and she just used to say it in this way. Qu'avez-vous donc? Lui dit un de ces rats parler," which means, what news, what news? I pray you, speak." She made me lift my hand, so, to remind me to raise my voice at the question. "Now, shall I dance for you?" "No, that will do. But after your mamma went to the Holy Virgin, as you say, with whom did you live then?" "With Madame Frederic and her husband. She took care of me, but she is nothing related to me. I think she is poor, for she had not so fine a house as mamma. I was not long there. Mr. Rochester asked me if I would like to go and live with him in England, and I said yes, for I knew Mr. Rochester before I knew Madame Frederic, and he was always kind to me and gave me pretty dresses and toys. But you see, he has not kept his word, for he has brought me to England, and now he's gone back again himself, and I never see him." After breakfast, Adele and I withdrew to the library, which room, it appears, Mr. Rochester had directed should be used as the schoolroom. Most of the books were locked up behind glass doors, but there was one bookcase left open, containing everything that could be needed in the way of elementary works, and several volumes of light literature, poetry, biography, travels, a few romances, etc. I suppose he had considered that these were all the governess would require for her private perusal, and indeed they contented me amply for the present. Compared with the scanty pickings I had now and then been able to glean at Lowood, they seemed to offer an abundant harvest of entertainment and information. In this room, too, there was a cabinet piano, quite new and of a superior tone. Also, an easel for painting and a pair of globes. I found my pupil sufficiently docile, though disinclined to apply. She had not been used to regular occupation of any kind. I felt sure it would be I felt sure it would be injudicious to confine her too much at first. So, when I had talked to her a great deal and got her to learn a little, and when the morning had advanced to noon, I allowed her to return to her nurse. I then proposed to occupy myself till dinner time in drawing some little sketches for her use. As I was going upstairs to fetch my portfolio and pencils, Mrs. Fairfax called to me. Your morning school hours are over now, I suppose, said she. She was in a room, the folding doors of which stood open. I went in when she addressed me. It was a large, stately apartment, with purple chairs and curtains, a Turkey carpet, walnut-panelled walls, one vast window rich in slanted glass, and a lofty ceiling nobly moulded. Mrs. Fairfax was dusted in some vases of fine purple spar, which stood in a sideboard. "What a beautiful room!" I exclaimed as I looked round, for I had never before seen any half so imposing. "Yes, this is the dining room. I have just opened the window to let in a little air and sunshine, for everything gets so damp in apartments that are seldom inhabited. The drawing room yonder feels like a vault." She pointed to a wide arch corresponding to the window, and hung like it with a Tyrian-dyed curtain, now looped up. Mounting to it by two broad steps, and looking through, I thought I caught a glimpse of a fairy place, so bright to my novice eyes appeared the view beyond. Yet it was merely a very pretty drawing-room, and within it a boudoir, both spread with white carpets, on which seemed laid brilliant garlands of flowers, both sealed with snowy mouldings of white grapes and vine leaves, beneath which glowed in rich contrast crimson couches and ottomans, while the ornaments on the pale Parian mantelpiece were of sparkling Bohemian glass, ruby red. And between the windows, large mirrors keep these rooms, Mrs. Fairfax, said I. No dust, no canvas coverings, except that the air feels chilly. One would think they were inhabited daily. Why, Miss Eyre, though Mr. Rochester's visits are rare, they're always sudden and unexpected, and as I observed that it put him out to find everything swathed up, and to have a bustle of arrangement on his arrival, I thought it best to keep the rooms in readiness. Is Mr. Rochester an exacting, fastidious sort of man? Not particularly so, but he has a gentleman's tastes and habits, and he expects to have things managed in conformity to them. Do you like him? Is he generally liked? By the way, I remember, like, in the previous chapters when she was a little girl, she always used to ask questions like, la la la, why? La 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 la, what do you mean? What is that? So, she has curbed her natural curious tendencies, but we still do see them from time to time, and a good thing too, because that's the only way we're gonna learn about stuff. Red Tempest says, "Sorry, my phone lost signal, so I'm 8 minutes behind now." Oh no. Okay, hope you can catch up. Do double times. But yes, so far, Thornfield Hall seems like a nice place. I am so glad that at least she's not gone to a place where people are mean, or like the old lady is like Mrs. Reed. No, the old lady seems to be so nice. She even has a cat. People who like cats and who have cats tend to be nice people. Though it's not a universally held thing, because there are evil cats and people who have evil cats and love their evil cats. So evil people with evil cats. Do you guys remember the stepmother at Cinderella? She had an evil cat and she was an evil lady. So you can't just say that everybody who has cats is a nice person. But yeah, usually I like a good cat lover. People who like cats, they're good in my book. All right, so yeah. Yeah, it sounds like a nice place. Red Temple says, Les Incompetents from Home Alone is the only French I know, lol. I know, right? I remember that part, and sometimes me and my sister, we like to call each or at least we bring that up. Like we say things to each other in French accent that are kind of like mean a little, but it's because we're just harking back to that movie. Yep, that was a very formative movie to me in my youth. But yeah, sorry you guys, I should have probably have practiced my French going in. But as it is, this is the best I can do, and thank you for your patience. And I will. The good thing is that this ebook has the not the Japanese, the French translation, and then so I can always let you know what they're saying. So far, nothing too like, oh my gosh, if I don't know what this French word means, I won't know. Like the whole book will be ruined. No, it's just little phrases here and there. But anyway, thank goodness that Jane knows how to speak French because she's getting along perfectly, at least following the chatterbox that is Adele. So yeah. So we are little by little learning also a bit more about Rochester, Mr. Rochester. So okay, we'll see. Well, let's see what else we learn. Do you like him? Is he generally liked? Oh, yes, the family have always been respected here. Almost all the land in this neighborhood, as far as you can see, has belonged to the Rochesters time out of mind. Well, but leaving his land out of the question, do you like him? Is he liked for himself? I have no cause to do otherwise than like him, and I believe he is considered a just and liberal landlord by his tenants, but he has never lived much amongst them. But has he no peculiarities? What, in short, is his character? Oh, his character is unimpeachable, I suppose. He is rather peculiar, perhaps. He has travelled a great deal, and seen a great deal of the world, I should think. I dare say he is clever, but I never had much conversation with him. In what way is he peculiar? I don't know. It's not easy to describe. Nothing striking, but you feel it when he speaks to you. You cannot always be sure whether he is in jest or earnest, whether he is pleased or contrary. You don't thoroughly understand him, in short. At least, I don't. But it is of no consequence. He's a very good master. This was all the account I got from Mrs. Fairfax of her employer and mine. There are people who seem to have no notion of sketching a character or observing and describing salient points, either in persons or things. The good lady evidently belonged to this class. My queries puzzled, but did not draw her out. Mr. Rochester was Mr. Rochester in her eyes. A gentleman, a landed proprietor, nothing more. She inquired and searched no further, and evidently wondered at my wish to gain a more definite notion of his identity. When we left the dining room, she proposed to show me over the rest of the house, and I followed her upstairs and downstairs, admiring as I went, for all was well arranged and handsome. The large front chambers I thought especially grand, and some of the third-story rooms, though dark and low, were interesting from their air of antiquity. The furniture once appropriated to the lower apartments had from time to time been removed here, as fashions changed, and the imperfect light entering by their narrow casements showed bedsteads of 100 years old, chests in oak or walnut, looking, with their strange carvings of palm branches and cherubs' heads, like types of Hebrew ark, rows of venerable chairs, high-backed and narrow, stools still more antiquated, on whose cushioned tops were yet apparent traces of half-effaced embroideries, wrought by fingers that for two generations had been coffin dust. All these relics gave to the third story of Thornfield Hall the aspect of a home of the past, a shrine of memory. I liked the hush, the gloom, the quaintness of these retreats in the day, but I by no means coveted a night's repose on one of those wide and heavy beds, shut in, some of them, with doors of oak, shaded, others, with wrought old English hangings crusted with thick work, portraying effigies of strange flowers and stranger birds and strangest human beings, all which would have looked strange indeed, by the pallid gleam of moonlight. "Do the servants sleep in these rooms?" I asked. "No, they occupy a range of smaller apartments to the back. No one ever sleeps here. One would almost say that, if there were a ghost at Thornfield Hall, this would be its haunt." "So I think. You have no ghosts, then?" "None that I ever heard of," returned Mrs. Fairfax, smiling. "Nor any traditions of one? No legends or ghost stories?" "I believe not. And yet it is said that the Rochesters have been rather a violent than a quieter race in their time. Perhaps, though, that is the reason they rest tranquilly in their graves now." "Yes, after life's fitful fever they sleep well," I muttered. "Where are you going now, Mrs. Fairfax?" For she was moving away. "On to the Leads. Will you come and see the view from thence?" I followed still, up a very narrow staircase to the attics, and thence by a ladder and through a trapdoor to the roof of the hall. I was now on a level with the crow colony, and could see into their nests. Leaning over the battlements and looking far down, I surveyed the grounds laid out like a map. The bright and velvet lawn closely girdling the grey base of the mansion, the field, wide as a park, dotted with its ancient timber, the wood, dun and sere, divided by a path visibly overgrown, greener with moss than the trees were with foliage, the church at the gates, the road, the tranquil hills, all reposing in the summer and in the autumn day's sun, the horizon bounded by a propitious sky. The horizon bounded by a propitious sky, azure, marbled with pearly white. No feature in the scene was extraordinary, but all was pleasing. When I turned from it and repassed the trapdoor, I could scarcely see my way down the ladder. The attic seemed black as a vault compared with that arch of blue air to which I had been looking up, and to that sunlit scene of grove, pasture, and green hill, of which the hall was the centre, and over which I had been gazing with delight. Mrs. Fairfax stayed behind a moment to fasten the trapdoor. I, by gift of groping, found the outlet from the attic, and proceeded to descend the narrow garret staircase. I lingered in the long passage to which this led, separating the front and back rooms of the third story. Narrow, low, and dim, with only one little window at the far end, and looking, with its 2 rows of small black doors all shut, like a corridor in some Bluebeard's castle. While I paced softly on, the last sound I expected to hear in so still a region, a laugh, struck my ear. It was a curious laugh, distinct, formal, mirthless. I stopped. The sound ceased, only for an instant. Then it began again, louder. For at first, though distinct, it was very low. It passed off in a clamorous peal that seemed to wake and echo in every lonely chamber, though it originated but in one, and I could have pointed out the door whence the accents issued. "Mrs. Fairfax!" I called out, for now I heard her descending the great stairs. "Did you hear that laugh? Who is it?" "Some of the servants, very likely," she answered. "Perhaps Grace Poole." "Did you hear it?" "Yes, plainly. I often hear her. She sews in one of these rooms. Sometimes Leah is with her. They are frequently noisy together." The laugh was repeated in its low syllabic tone, and terminated in an odd murmur. "Grace!" exclaimed Mrs. Fairfax. I really did not expect any Grace to answer, for the laugh was tragic, as preternatural a laugh as any I had ever heard, and, but that it was high noon and no circumstance of ghostliness accompanied the curious cachinnation, but that neither scene nor season favored fear, I should have been superstitiously afraid. However, the event showed me I was a fool for entertaining a sense even of surprise. The door nearest me opened, and a servant came out, a woman of between 30 and 40, a set, square-made figure, red-haired and with a hard, plain face. Any apparition less romantic or less ghostly could scarcely be conceived. "Too much noise, Grace," said Mrs. Fairfax. "Remember directions." Grace curtsied still, and went in. She's a person we have to sew and assist Leah in her housemaid's work, continued the widow. Not altogether unobjectionable in some points, but she does well enough. By the by, how have you got on with your new pupil this morning? The conversation turned on Adele, continued till we reached the light and cheerful region below. Adele came running to meet us in the hall, explaining, Mesdames, vous êtes servies, adding, Je viens pas, moi. Something about being hungry. Ladies, dinner is served. I'm starved, yes. We found dinner ready and waiting for us in Mrs. Fairfax's room. End of chapter. All right. So we get some information, some little bits and pieces of the various mysteries surrounding Thornfield Hall. Right now, probably if you haven't read the book, you probably haven't caught them on. So we get the whole tour of the place. So yeah, the place is full of mysteries and all kinds of things, intrigues, I guess. But most importantly, we get a little bit of a look, or we get to know a little bit, even if it's just by a insufficient report from Mrs. Fairfax, who doesn't really care to think about people's characters. She's just like, he's like, okay, man. That's the most we can get. We're gonna have to wait to see what or who Mr. Rochester is. But don't worry, we'll get there soon enough. And we also, again, we got to meet Adele and her nurse, Sophie. And then she told us a story of how she came to live in this big house. Now, we don't know. We know that she knew Mr. Rochester from her life in France, but we don't know how they're related. We don't know how he became the ward of this little girl. We'll see. Also, we got to know more about Mrs. Fairfax's connection to Mr. Rochester. So one of the family names of Mr. Rochester, I think it's like from the maternal side, is Fairfax. So, but she's just like, I don't try to impose upon that connection. Like, I just think of him as my employer, and yeah, like I don't presume on that connection. Then we have them, like, Jane really likes her new place. She finds it like accommodating, like she likes her little room. Everything so far is very nice. Except she has like when you go upstairs, the place is very quiet. And I just love the whole aura of like thinking like, of like exploring the upstairs. One of my favorite things when I was a kid was going to like a country house and just exploring. I loved doing that, and I think that's kind of like something that I still retained. I just love old houses, so I can imagine how much fun it would be to just go in like into the attics and look for like old dresses and stuff and do like a little dress-up party. That would be so much fun. Anyway, but I digress. So they went to explore the upstairs, and again, nobody lives in that house. Like it's a huge house, but only servants live in it, and Mrs. Fairfax keeps it working. But we do have like some servants working all the way up there. Grace Poole, she like does like sewing and stuff like that. So yeah, we see that a little bit of the house. It is autumn, so hopefully that she is able to continue to get along with the people she lives with. Let's see. Oh, the French translation is cool to have in the back. Yeah, I like this this edition of Jane Eyre. It's on Google Play if you want it. I hadn't. There was another version that I got, but it just didn't. Let's see if this was the cover art. It doesn't have the cover art, unfortunately. But this one is a good one. There's another one that's also free that has like a whole bunch of extras, but it had like typos, so I did not appreciate that. So I was like, I'd rather have like a more simpler version, but without typos. So anyway, so yeah. Let's see. Red Tempest says, the French translation is cool. Yep. And it says, love the trapdoor. Sounds like having a cool clubhouse. I know. It would be awesome to just go on up there and just look at the sky. And it would just be fun to just hang out of. I don't know. I think it's cool to go up there. Not at night, of course. I don't believe in ghosts either. Like Jane Eyre certainly does not believe in ghosts as well. Which is actually something... Oh, I'll go back to it. But anyway, it would be not at night because it would still kind of be dreary. But also back to Jane Eyre and ghosts. Like when she was a little child, she used to have a very vivid imagination. It was fed a lot by her nurse's tales of ghosts and horror stories. So growing up, she probably let her imagination wild. But now, after a good English education, she has now reined in those fantastical superstitions. Good for her, I guess. It actually helps because sometimes your mind does a lot more havoc, and you like fear is mostly what your mind conjures up. So that's one of the things about. That's why I don't like to watch like scary things. I never watch scary things at all because like I have a very vivid imagination. I could just totally like imagine bad things around me in the dark. As it is, like I could be alone at home, and if I hear a weird sound, I'm just like, oh, whatever. It's just, I don't know, the freezer or whatever, the ice machine or whatnot, the downstairs neighbors, whatever. So, yeah, it's when you have like a very imaginative mind, you have to kind of take care of what you what you put in it. Yes. Also, yeah, where's Noemi when we need French pronunciation, right? You know what? I actually, I would like to ask her, but also I would be really embarrassed to have her listen to my terrible French. I mean, the only way I can kind of make out the meaning and kind of pronounce is because I took French for 3 years when I was in high school. So it's been a while, like a long while. But I'll check to see if there are any other things in the future, then next chapter, to see if I can say it better. And yes, tune in next week to find out more about the people who own the house. Yes, indeed. We are going to learn a little bit more about that in chapter 2. Let me look up. Yes, we are going to meet yeah, well, ready. Yes, we are going to meet Mr. Rochester in the next chapter. Now it is 11:04 and it's been an hour, so I do believe we should stop here, but not before I go over my little extras. I like to show you guys extras. Again, I love all of the adaptations. Well, I don't love all of them, but I like the adaptations for this novel. They did a really good job with it. So we have, let me show you. The book was very clear as to how Thornfield Hall, like the book says, she was waiting at 8 o'clock. You guys, okay, so it was 8 o'clock when she got to Milket, and then she had to wait for John, who was late, you know, and then he like basically just let the horse walk all the way to Thornfield. Like, dude, 6 hours, it took like 6 miles. Okay, you guys. It was 6 miles from the town to Thornfield Hall. It took them 2 hours on carriage. You guys, I could have walked those 6 miles in 2 hours. Freaking John. Oh my goodness. So yeah. So by the time she got to Thornfield Hall, it was like 10 o'clock. Plus she had dinner and whatnot. So it was almost midnight by the time she went to bed. So here is a first glimpse of Thornfield Hall. And we also have Mrs. Fairfax receiving her. By the way, Mrs. Fairfax in the 2011 version is played by none other than the great Dame Judi Dench. Love her. And oh, there she is. She looks really nice and homely. Now, the 1983 version got it wrong because it's still like the middle of the day when she got to Thornfield Hall. So this is Thornfield Hall, you guys. And she gets a look around the place. This is the hall. And I believe, I don't know. I want to believe that this was not a set. They did a really good job with this version because this is during the time when they had all of the BBC adaptations of books. They were all like really like fake looking sets. I want to believe that this is not a set, but I think it's a set. I do think it's a set, but it's still, they did a really good job with it. And we have, of course, Mrs. Fairfax greeting Jane Eyre. Here's Jane. There's Leia. Then the 1997 version. This is, I think, my least favorite. Although it did have Syrian Hines, who usually is a really good actor. But this one, Rochester as Syrian Hines as Rochester was not my favorite. But anyway, here's Thornfield Hall. And here is Mrs. What's her name? Mrs. Fairfax greeting Jane Eyre. Again, they got the time wrong. And finally, the 2006 version, which is my favorite. So here again, we get a glimpse of Thornfield Hall, only one window showing, just like the book says, very faithful. And then we get Mrs. Fairfax. Where's the cat? Do you see a cat? I don't see a cat. Maybe this is a cat. This is a very low quality screenshot, you guys. I'm sorry. It's Jane Eyre. She greets her. Yeah. And one of my favorite exchanges here, though, it's not in the book, of course. She's like, goodness, Miss Jane, how much you're eating? You must be starving. How long has it been since you sat beside the fire and eaten a hearty meal? Basically, she was thinking like, okay, it's been like you've been traveling for hours and hours. So how long has it been? Like, how many hours since you started your travels? And, you know, she expected, like, maybe since last night I haven't sat in the front of a fire and eaten a hearty meal. Well, what does Jane Eyre reply? Well, it's been approximately 8 years. Oh, gosh. Approximately 8 years since she sat in front of the fire while eating a good meal. Because remember, Lowood School, it was not known for its luxuries. So, Mrs. Fairfax was like, thought it was a joke. So yeah, like that little exchange, which was of course an extra. And finally, I just want to finish with some of the delightful memes that Little Purple Butterfly shared with us. So we have Jane Eyre deciding how to act when being punished. So you have Jane's thoughts and Helen's influence, again from the amazing Emperor's New Groove. Yeah. This is so unfair, you know what you should do. And then, of course, the good angel says, whatever you're thinking of, just don't. Yes, yes. Miss Temple having a late night tea party with her students. Yes, because Miss Temple was the goat. She was, she had like a little cake for the little girls, even though it was from her private stash. She gave them a piece each. Yes. Again, we have Mr. Brocklehurst coming in to make everybody's life a misery. And, you know, he's like, yeah, you want long hair? Let's chop their hair. Curly hair? Let's chop their hair. They have hair? Let's chop all their hair. Unfortunately, it was a very harsh place until the typhoid epidemic, unfortunately, took like a tragedy to make things better for them. And then we have, again, Mr. Brocklehurst. Yeah, he was cutting up hairs. Yeah. Good job on that, Little Butterfly. Loving that meme. Aw, that's so sad. Again, which abuse is more tolerable? At the end of the day, though, Jane says, like, yes, we had privations, it was cold, we lacked food, the big girls used to steal my food, but ultimately, I enjoy, like, I would much rather take Lowood than living with Mrs. Gateshead and her, living in Gateshead with Mrs. Reed and her children. Like, that's gotta be some abuse, you guys. Let's see what else. Oh yeah, you guys, how did typhus break out at Lowood? So, of course, like the back in the day, they said that it came in from the wind, and to a certain extent, Lowood was built in like a damp place, so that definitely had like its role in, making children sick, or at least those who had like like tuberculosis, it would make them even sicker. So, because of the location and because they thought that typhus came from the cold and the damp, they built a better place in a better location. So that's actually good. But despite all the changes, Mr. Brocklehurst still had to be still had to be the treasurer, or at least be part of the whole dealing. So thank goodness though that the committee was appointed and he was not the sole person overseeing things. And finally, again, Jane had to be very discreet when sending out her advertisement that she wants to look for a new job. Had to be very discreet with her with taking her letters and getting all the things, because of course, when you're looking for a job, you don't want to let your employers know that you're looking for a better situation if you really want to leave it, because I don't know, it just kind of feels, it's just no good. You don't advertise, or you don't say anything until you have the job on hand. Then you'll be like, yeah, they want references, but otherwise the job is yours. That's when you bring it up. So yeah, Jane had to be very careful. Otherwise people would say, oh, you're not grateful, or I don't know. But in the end, the good thing though is that the superintendent was able to get her like the recommendations she wanted, and it only took a month, but she was able to get everything done. All right, so yes, thank you so much for the memes. And again, if you have any memes you want to share with me, or you have any thoughts about this, be sure to share them with me. You can share them on Twitter. You can add me there. You can also send your comments here. I always look forward to reading them. And remember, we will have another read-along on Wednesday. Monday, Wednesdays for sure, read-alongs. Probably Fridays. But for sure, we'll have another read-along. And I'll try to see if we do it in the afternoon to see if there's other people that want to join us for the live. Let me know what you guys think about Thornfield Hall and what symbolisms you find so far. There's a lot that could be said, but so far it seems to be an okay place. I kind of hesitate to ask like book club questions, like like when we have chit chats, when we talk about like ooh foreshadowing, or ooh this or ooh that. That's why I kind of like, I don't know how to end these things, because I want to do like literary analysis, you guys. I want to do like, I have these notes and I have like, oh my gosh, did you guys notice this and this leads to that. I can't do it until we finish reading this book. So that's why if you have any thoughts, do share them. Again, no spoilers, you guys. It was a pleasure to read, and we will see you on the next one, you guys. See you on Wednesday, and thank you so much, all of you guys who joined me, for Tempest Crusher, who also made it here, Liz, let's see, who else was here? Little Butterfly, who said hi, Noodle Dumplings Kimchi, Liz, German Food Productions, happy that you were able to join us, Akihana, hope you enjoy the replay, and to all of you who are going to enjoy it later in posterity, hope you have a wonderful day. I'll see you on Wednesday.